I'm joined today by Abdullah Sharif, who spent over 3 decades as an aviation engineer and has served as a peace diplomat to Afghanistan on behalf of the United States. And among other awards, he was given the Department of State's Superior Honor Award for extraordinary contribution in the U.S. effort to bring peace and prosperity to the people of Afghanistan. He's the author of a couple of books, including the upcoming Return to Kabul, an Afghan American's Odyssey in Afghanistan, which is due out in September. It's so great to have you on. I think it's very easy from the US as a consumer of news to do two things that sort of give a distorted view of Afghanistan. One is to see the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan as similar in more ways than is accurate. And the other is to only see Afghanistan through the lens of the recent US military incursion there. So let's start with the most recent first. Talk to us about the mistakes of seeing Afghanistan as just another military conflict that the U.S. is involved in. Why is that a faulty way to look at it?
The reason it's a faulty way is because, well, you have to remember what happened 14 years ago and why we went to Afghanistan. Actually, we were in Afghanistan before that as a result of the Cold War, when the communists took over Afghanistan in 1978. And the government was on the verge of collapse when the Soviet Union moved in. And of course, we wanted to help the Afghans fight the Soviet Union, but at the same time, because of the Cold War, we wanted to embarrass the Soviet Union. And once the Soviet Union was defeated, then we had no longer a dog in this fight. And so even though we had poured in billions of dollars worth of military hardware and so forth, and we basically left Afghanistan by itself. And so the five major groups that were fighting the Soviets, then they started fighting each other. And then so, of course, they paved the way for the Taliban to come and take over Afghanistan, which was basically a failed state at the time. And then we know that Al-Qaeda moved in and they hatched a plan to attack the United States in September of 2001. And so then we had to go there in response to that attack, try to bring some kind of stabilization in Afghanistan. And we were greeted by the Afghans as liberators. People came out on the streets and shaved their beards, unlike the situation in Iraq where we were not welcome from the get-go.
Yeah, there's been this sort of reflexive move from many who are either critics but also supporters of U.S. military action over the last 15 years overseas to sort of lump in, oh, we went to Iraq and we went to Afghanistan, as if the context was similar, as if the history was similar. And as you're pointing out, there was very little in common there. I'm interested specifically, though, in the connection to the Cold War, which is a connection that is essentially non-existent with the American history in Iraq. And that's actually a really big part of how Afghanistan has sort of existed in terms of geopolitical relationships, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. And I think that, so if you look at Afghanistan before I left, in my book, I talk about the golden age of Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a viable nation state. It had the rule of law. It had educated people. It respected the rights of minorities and women and so forth. But unfortunately, this Cold War, the veterans of the Soviet Union that wanted to have access to the warm waters of Indian Ocean through Afghanistan first and eventually Pakistan, that really brought Afghanistan to the fore again, and unfortunately became a pawn in this whole game.
What are the sort of socio-political issues that are currently being faced in Afghanistan, which also, if you do any sort of cursory analysis, show you that it's a very different situation or status quo than many of the surrounding countries?
Yeah, so here's the problem. And when we went to Afghanistan, as I mentioned before, people actually were welcoming us, and they still do. A good number of Afghans still like us to be in Afghanistan because they know the alternative is even worse. But we unfortunately had our eyes on Iraq because, and at one level, there's definitely a connection between Afghanistan and Iraq, or 9/11, I should say, in Iraq, because the moment we were attacked, we wanted to use that as a launching pad to go into Iraq. So we went to Afghanistan with only 17,500 troops to pacify this country, which is terribly mountainous and had undergone this tremendous strife for the past 2 decades or so. And so what we had to do, we had to ally ourselves with these warlords, with their militias. So use their militias to actually get rid of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, which we did. And unfortunately, we gave these warlords legitimacy in Afghanistan. So now they have become part of the government. And one of the reasons that the Taliban have become resurgent is because they tell the rank and file Afghans, see what America did. They came here and they brought these very bad people back to power. So what you have today is, even though there's a government of national unity, but they're anything but united, because from different parts of the country with different agendas, and they're the ones who have divided the country along a tribal, ethnic lines and faults, and that is a major problem in Afghanistan. And one of the reasons that we have not been able to really do a lot of good work. We have put a lot of money, but not much show for it, is because of incompetent and divided government in Afghanistan.
Yeah, well, I was just reading that close to 3/4 of U.S. Afghan casualties came after the troop surge that was ordered by President Obama. And I've talked to people who have very different views about that surge and the number of troops, as you said, that were originally committed. One side is there were clearly not enough troops committed initially, and the surge was both correct morally and strategically. And another side says, it really was not the right move. It was not a prudent move from President Obama, aside from the fact that it may have been necessary to achieve some military objectives. It was the wrong move to send more troops. What's your view on that? Is it possible to even whittle it down to an answer?
I think so. I think that the surge was the right thing to do. And of course, President Obama at the time, I was in Afghanistan at the time, and President Obama listened to commanders on the field. And so it was the right thing. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too late. And more so, too late, probably, I would say. And by that time, Afghanistan had gone south. And so this culture of impunity that the government that was in power and the war was in power, they had really, again, alienated a lot of people. And so we were there. I was in Kandahar at that time, and a lot of places that we couldn't really go in. The surge liberated, but of course, the Afghan government was absent to come and fill the vacuum after we withdrew from those areas. So those areas are again in the hands of Taliban, or they have free, they're able to move freely. So that is the problem, because this government, even though we have helped a lot, it's not a legitimate government in the eyes of the Afghan, and that's why they have not been able to make a lot of inroads in stability and reconstruction of the country.
Well, along those lines, I'd be curious what your thought is, as someone who has served as a peace diplomat, on the sort of responsibility that a country has once they make an initial decision to enter militarily, to sort of stick it out. And I see a corollary here. I think one good comparison would be when we look at the resurgence of ISIS in the vacuum that resulted from the original decision to go into Iraq. And we've had many debates on the program. Well, listen, President Obama does have a responsibility to be involved in that fight because of his predecessor's decision to go into Iraq, which caused instability in this power vacuum. Is that a valid sort of moral reasoning to you, that once you break something, you have to be there to fix it? And if so, for how long does that responsibility remain?
Well, it depends. I think, obviously there are people on both sides. There are people that are for and against. And I think it depends, because we need to be involved as the sole superpower in the world. And of course, we have got a lot at stake. Not only we have to be concerned about the United States of America, but our interests in those countries as well. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the people in the area, indigenous people, they step up to the plate and do their fighting as well. And that, I think, applies in Iraq and ISIS, and as well as Afghanistan. I just go back to this problem that we have, unfortunately, is that we ally ourselves with very bad people. We did the same thing in Iraq. After we rebuilt the army of Saddam Hussein after the invasion, then we gave it all to Nur al-Maliki. And Nur al-Maliki completely dismantled that army and staffed it with the Shias. And guess what? That army just ran away and they could not face ISIS. And the same sort of a thing in Afghanistan, unfortunately, because there's a strong army there, but the army is associated with an illegitimate government, and that's why they don't have the moral authority and the courage to really actually go and defend the country.
Isn't this sort of a repeated MO that we see from the United States, which is an alliance with a group or organization that ultimately ends up fighting against us or being the bad guys, so to speak, to boil it down in a way that's somewhat crude? I mean, this extends far beyond just Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, yeah, I would say that's very difficult for it. That's why we have to be very careful when we go to these places, and we need to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row, as it were, because obviously we listen to a lot of different people. Unfortunately, bad people have taken advantage of our good intentions, perhaps. And then, so since we don't know the history of these places, the culture of these places, we don't know, speak the languages, and we don't know the background of the people that speak talk a good talk, I should say, but actually they have different motivations, which is really detrimental to their countries, their areas, but also to our interests as well.
No question at all. I'll remind everybody we've been speaking with Abdullah Sharif. The upcoming book is called Return to Kabul, an Afghan American's Odyssey in Afghanistan. It is due out in September. Thank you so much for talking to us about this.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.